As we continue reviewing the Lightning season that was, we'll talk about a couple of surprises and unexpected events that shaped the course of the Lightning season. Plus, how important is the Lightning signing a 2024 seventh round goaltender? We'll cover all of that and more on today's episode of Locked On Lightning.
You're Locked On Lightning, your daily podcast on the Tampa Bay Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, everyone. Josh Sperber here, thanking all of you for making Locked On Lightning your first listen every day. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And if your team is the Tampa Bay Lightning, then this is the show for you. And we'll talk about some surprising moments that kind of shaped the Tampa Bay Lightning season. It was a solid regular season, at least for the Tampa Bay Lightning. Tough exit in the postseason, as we've been talking about pretty much nonstop. And a big reason that the Lightning had a solid start to the regular season was J.J. Moser. 2 goals, 9 assists through the first couple months of the season before a big-time injury that took him out of the season for about 2 months in the middle of the year. And that was definitely, I feel like it's hard to call injuries somewhat surprises. I mean, they're not something that anyone plans for. They're not something that anyone, looks for to happen in a season. It's just unfortunately a part of the game, playing in a contact sport like hockey is. And I think that putting Moser's injury on this list was definitely a surprising event that I think did hinder the Lightning a little bit, mostly because it was kind of during the just the beginning process of Moser joining the team, and just during the process of JJ just adjusting to his new role with the Tampa Bay Lightning. I mean, it's something I've mentioned many times is how Moser switched his position. I mean, he mainly played on the left side on defense, but was forced to switch to the right side to get on the top line and play with Lightning captain Victor Hedman, who is obviously not going to be switching sides on defense. And it seemed like everything was kind of clicking at the beginning for JJ Moser. He was definitely a factor in the offensive game. His defensive play looked pretty solid, but when you get a lower body injury, particularly one that affects legs, affects the movement of any given player during the game, it's gonna sting, and it's gonna affect the way that they play. And it's an injury that I don't want to say Moser never really recovered from, because obviously he got back out on the ice and played at a high level. But it just didn't seem like he ever got back to full strength. It didn't seem like his movements were as crisp as they were at the start of the season. And, I think sometimes a serious injury, an injury that has you out for a couple months is going to do that to you. Unfortunately, again, that's just the way things are sometimes. But it just came at a difficult time where things were really starting to click for JJ and the Lightning defense. And it got really, the injury just happened right at a pretty key developmental period of the season, just, as it kind of turns from beginning of the season jitters, shaking off the rust, whatever you want to call it, to mid-season form. And it seemed like Moser was really getting there, and he never really got back up to that kind of elite level by the end of the season. But hopefully his strong play in the IIHF carries over to the 25-26 NHL season. And maybe the biggest surprise of the year, something that I know that I have talked about quite a bit, was Gage Gonzalez's call-up, really his second one. He just looked like another guy the Lightning were trying to add into the fold. Just really didn't show anything I don't want to say special, because you definitely saw flashes of high level talent here and there over the first couple months of Gage Gonzalez's NHL season. Um, and a lot of it honestly coincided when JJ Moser came back, which was mostly just coincidental. Like that's just when Gage's second call up was. Coming back right after Four Nations, he had a really nice run of games with points in 4 out of the last 5 games the Lightning played, assists in 5 of the last 6 games that the Tampa Bay Lightning played after Four Nations. And then by the end of the season, he became one of the better offensive players on the Tampa Bay Lightning. I mean, he had such a great finish to his first NHL season, really. And it just made me very excited about just another Lightning prospect coming up and shining on the NHL stage. And I think Gage Gonzalez was definitely one of the big surprises and one of the most fun stories over the course of this past NHL season, just because of the kind of out of nowhere big role that he really carved himself. I mean, yeah, he was a known name. He was a guy that had been in the Lightning system for 4 or 5 years, but you know, it was hard to see him as the game-changing prospect that he ended up becoming. And that was really Gage Gonzalez. He was one of the leading point scorers for Tampa Bay in the postseason as well. I mean, he just stepped up on so many different levels, and he came from, okay, this is a nice looking rookie, just a solid kind of roster filler. But now he's looking a lot more like an impact player, like someone who could be kind of a game-changing winger for the Tampa Bay Lightning. And he can play center. He can play both wings. Really, really valuable player, I think Gage Gonzalez is. And that, to me, was maybe the best surprise of the Lightning season, showing that you have a young player who's really starting to develop. And the Lightning could be getting, a big-time player going forward with Gage Gonzalez. But Gage couldn't do it on his own. Certainly needed a little extra forward depth, and that was something that the Lightning were able to get during the trade deadline. When it comes to contending teams, they don't always pull the trigger and make a big move that could help the team, not just in the current season, but in the future. And the Lightning did exactly that. The Lightning's front office just continued to show that they're willing to do what it takes to take risks to keep this team a contender and keep this team an elite NHL team. The Lightning were top 10 in the entire NHL in terms of wins. Even when you look at regulation versus regulation and overtime combined wins, the Lightning are top 10 in that category. In the regular season, they were one of the best teams in the NHL. And I think a lot of that had to do with the Lightning's offense really in both halves of the season. They led the league in goals. They scored more goals than anyone else. They scored more goals per game than anyone else in the NHL. I mean, their offense was elite. And a lot of that had to do with the acquisition of Oliver Bjorkstrand and Yanni Gourde, and not just to get 2 players that, could move the needle a little bit. Yanni being just a solid 2-way player, and Bjorkstrand with just a knack for goal scoring. Unfortunately, his injury kept him out of the postseason, but getting those 2 guys really for not that much. Mikey Eyssimont was a forward that was basically replaced by Oliver Bjorkstrand in the starting lineup. That was a one in like a straight swap sort of position that the Lightning improved on in terms of talent, getting Bjorkstrand as one of the players for Mikey Eyssimont. And then they also got a second versatile forward in Yanni Gourde who can play on the left side and in the center as well. And I think that was a move that really solidified the Lightning's run to a top playoff seed. But unfortunately, it was the Panthers who ended up victorious in that series again. But I think the Lightning's regular season success, in some ways, you have to give some credit to Yanni Gourde and Oliver Bjorkstrand, because they definitely helped give the Lightning that final push in the end of the season as they made it to number 2 in the Atlantic Division. And the Lightning signed their goaltender number 2. Jonas Johansson was inked to a 2-year deal a couple of weeks ago. Another next big Lightning signing, another goaltender, Harrison Meneghin. We're going to talk about what the signing of the young netminder means for the Tampa Bay Lightning. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1-ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, Wonderful Pistachios are packed with fiber and better-for-you unsaturated fats to help you keep feeling fuller longer. Personally, I love the no shells variety. It's the perfect grab-and-go snack for busy days, whether I'm snacking at my desk on a road trip or just need a quick protein boost. They're always my go-to. And if you love cracking open every shell for that satisfying crunch, the in-shell options are a classic favorite. So get snacking and get cracking with a snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. The Tampa Bay Lightning have already made a small handful of signings, all dealing with prospects or current players. 2 goalies, 1 defenseman. Jonas Johansson re-signed to a 2-year deal. Charlie Diastos to an entry-level deal. And same now with Harrison Meneghin. 3-year entry-level contract beginning with the 25-26 NHL season. After the 20-year-old Harrison Meneghin, a 7th rounder in last year's NHL draft, appeared in 35 regular season contests with the Medicine Hat Tigers in the Western Hockey League, getting 23 wins, 9 losses, 2 overtime losses, .901 save percentage, .256 goals against average, and 3 shutouts. The 20-year-old Meneghin also got in 16 playoff contests and won 14 of them. 2.35 goals allowed average, 3 more shutouts after getting 3 in 35 regular season contests, and helped the Medicine Hat Tigers to their 6th ever Western Hockey League championship. And the only reason that I'm questioning this move is just because it's another goaltender taking up cap space, but I think this is a slam dunk for Tampa Bay. I imagine that Meneghin will see at least the ECHL this season, possibly even Syracuse, but I'm always a fan of adding more goalies to the roster, and I think he's someone that seems like he could be a netminder of the future. You know, you don't like to think about Andrei Vasilevsky really ever leaving, because him just being healthy this year, I think, was one of the reasons that the Lightning had so much success in the regular season. But the fact is, Vasilevsky is 30 years old, going to be 31 by the beginning of the NHL season. And, you know, at some point, the Lightning are going to have to look for a replacement, a potential next goalie. And Johansson, I think, is a solid goaltender. He definitely provides some stability in that backup goaltending position for the next 2 seasons. But 2 years from now, Johansson will be in his mid-30s and might not be getting another contract. Meneghin will be well into his prime, and I think it's good timing, I think, for the Lightning to start kind of grooming the next man up in terms of the goaltender. And with these 3 years with Vasilevsky there, the Lightning do, I think, have a lot of space, a lot of wiggle room on their roster to be able to have this guy as, maybe the next Lightning goaltender. And I think it's hard to say after one, pro season, 1 year after he gets drafted. It's easy to look someone's good year and say, oh, this guy's the next up. But I think that, it's definitely a start. The Lightning, it's not the Lightning aren't developing. It's not like they're not developing goaltenders, but they don't have a lot of top goaltending prospects. And a 20-year-old kid who just won a league championship, took this Medicine Hat team to their first Memorial Cup appearance since 2007. A guy who has a goals allowed average well under 3 and a save percentage well over 900 in almost 130 games in the WHL is a guy to me that shows that he can, start that road to the NHL. I think he's a guy who's well on his way to being an NHL netminder, a guy who came up in big games, a guy who has been in big moments already in his young career. That can certainly be valuable. And you've got, I think, a need for the goalies on the lower levels for the Tampa Bay Lightning. I think Brendan Halverson had a great season with Syracuse, but he came into the NHL for, the first time in a while, and he got some goals scored on him. 5 goals allowed in one NHL game for Brandon Halverson. I'm not saying that he is, not an NHL caliber goaltender. I'm sure there's definitely some teams that could use him. But I mean, I'm just not sure if Halverson is, necessarily the answer as a starting goaltender right now in the NHL. Certainly not on the Tampa Bay Lightning. And, if he was auditioning for Jonas Johansson's role, that's not a role I think he can get either. But he can definitely provide some solid goaltending and kind of spell Meneghin a little bit and have a nice duo at that Syracuse level. And if that's where Halverson ends up topping out, then it's not a huge detriment to the Tampa Bay Lightning. But he's also a guy who's worked his way from the AHL to the NHL and knows how to be a professional and can help Meneghin develop into a solid goaltender. And I think it's going to be a little while before we see Meneghin go up for Tampa Bay. So if, break last in case of emergency, we have an injury to Vasilevsky or Johansson, Halverson can kind of hold down the fort as the third alternate goaltender until Meneghin can really get himself ready. But they've got a guy who can fill in for now on a short-term basis if needed. And obviously they've got their starter in Vasilevsky, a Vezina finalist and one of the best goaltenders on the planet. So I think that the Lightning can they can just solidify their goalie setup really with kind of a number 3, number 4 guy in the organization in Harrison Meneghin. And he's someone that, again, might not be up in the NHL until the very end of this entry-level contract. But I think it's a good step forward in terms of getting some more young goaltending talent in the Lightning system and because you get a younger guy like that, someone that comes off of playoff success, comes off of some juniors level success, whatever you have it, that can just create more competition. It inspires kind of the older guys to be like, all right, if I don't step up, this young kid's going to take my job. And it just, promotes more goaltending talent in the system, which is always a good thing. So I think that the Lightning aren't are doing a good job by making these small signings, not picking up guys with too big of a cap hit. And I think that they're making moves that are going to be good for the franchise in the long term, even if it's hard to see how immediate of an effect that these moves end up having. And the Lightning might not see the fruits of this Harrison Meneghin signing at the NHL level for another 3-5 years, even maybe even longer than that. But it's a step in the right direction with some young goaltending talent, a guy who has had experience in tough games at lower levels of the professional ladder. So I think that the Lightning hopefully are making a good move for their future by picking up this Harrison Meneghin's contract to a 3-year entry-level deal. And now we're going to go down the second lines, the forwards and defensemen. Talk about how much higher or lower I am on these players compared to the beginning of the season. We started this with some of the top line guys yesterday, so we'll go higher or lower on the second liners. For defense, that's Ryan McDonagh and Eric Chernak. On offense, Anthony Cirelli, Brandon Hagel, and Nick Paul, I'd say, were the main second line guys for the majority of the season. Again, guys like Connor Geekie, Yanni Gourde, Gage Gonzalez switched into that second line. Really, other than the top line of forwards, the Lightning on the offensive side tend to mix things up quite a bit. Defensively, it was Chernak and McDonagh for the entire season, except when Chernak picked up the injury. And we'll start with him because I don't really know if I'm higher or lower on Eric Chernak. I think I'm just right in the middle on him. Like, I just don't know if there's much of a change for the way I see or the way anyone really sees a guy like Eric Chernak, because he's not a player who ends up making a huge impact when it comes to offense. I mean, he's one of those guys that's just in the curious position of being both, kind of a needle moving defenseman. A lot of Chernak's positive influence on the Tampa Bay Lightning doesn't exactly show up in the stat sheet just because he's such a strong defensive player for Tampa Bay, but he really, I think, complements Ryan McDonagh very well. Both are defensive-minded guys, but when McDonagh kind of sees a lane and uses his hockey IQ to, move up the ice and start jump-starting the Lightning offense from the back, Chernak is able to just kind of be a plug stopping the drain on the Lightning's defensive side, and he can definitely play a factor in the offense as well. A couple of key goals for Tampa Bay over the course of the season and a whole bunch of assists as well. Eric Chernak was right behind Ryan McDonagh with 21 points, 12th on the team, 3 goals, 18 assists, was 4th among Lightning defensemen behind Hedman, Radish, and McDonagh in overall points. And his 18 assists were also 12th on the team. Among defensemen, they were also 4th on the Tampa Bay Lightning. So his offensive capabilities are certainly kind of there, but he's just a solid defense. He's just a lot of his contributions don't show up in the stat sheet. He does a lot of the little things very well. So I think if anything, I might go a little bit lower, but I'd say Chernak is just right about where he was at the beginning of the season, just a solid rotational top 4 defenseman, I think, for Tampa Bay. And Ryan McDonagh, I think, is always going to be higher, but definitely for this season, I'm going higher on Ryan McDonagh. Aside from the fact that we appreciate him coming on our show back in March, and just, got to see firsthand what a good person that he is on and off the ice. McDonough had an exceptional season coming back for Tampa Bay. I mean, it was going to be higher as soon as he signed that contract again with the Tampa Bay Lightning, showing that he never really wanted to go. Continued to be such an important piece of this Tampa Bay Lightning team, huge part of their defensive identity, and just establishing himself further and further on the pantheon of great defensemen in NHL history. I think McDonough has produced a Hall of Fame career with a whole lot of success wherever he has gone, and I don't think the Lightning have the same level of success that they did in 2025 if Ryan McDonough doesn't make an appearance or doesn't return to Tampa Bay. And I know I'm going higher with a lot of these first and second line guys, but those top two Tampa Bay Lightning lines, I think, were so key to what Tampa did this entire regular season. Definitely going to go higher on Brandon Hagel, who I think everyone in the NHL is going to say the same thing. He established himself as one of the best in the game right now, and I think the playoffs didn't really show that as much as you'd like to. A questionable suspension for Hagel after a hit was penalized in game, and then the extra suspension certainly wasn't what you wanted from Hagel. Tough playoffs for him after playing all 82 games for the second straight season and eclipsing his career best in goals by 9, assists by 6, and points by 15, and plus minus by a total of plus 10. And I mean, any way you slice it, Brandon Hagel was one of the best players for the Tampa Bay Lightning this season, and he turned into one of the best players in the entire NHL. And I think the same can be true for Anthony Cirelli, because like Brandon Hagel, he played his way onto Canada's Four Nations roster and made himself a pretty key part of Team Canada's victory in the inaugural Four Nations face-off for Team Canada. And he's a Selke nominee. I think he's someone that certainly deserves consideration of taking home that award. I think it is definitely not a stretch to say that Cirelli is one of, if not the best defensive forwards in the entire NHL. I think, unfortunately, that might be a little bit skewed due to the fact that you've got two representatives of the Florida Panthers who were also named Selke finalists. Panthers made the playoffs. That might have a little extra meaning in how the Selke voting goes. But I think Cirelli, who also set career highs in points, assists, and goals, as well as plus minus, while committing the third fewest penalty minutes he has committed in a single NHL season, doing it in 80 games, just 28 minutes in the box. Cirelli was just so instrumental to Tampa Bay this season and another absolutely crucial player. So definitely higher on Anthony Cirelli. And Nick Paul, you can also say the same thing about. It's hard to dislike the way Nick Paul plays, a guy who stands up for his teammates when needed and really just does whatever the Lightning ask of him. I mean, you ask him to be a more defensive-minded forward, be a little physical. He does that. You ask him to put up key goals and, get some points. He does that. He's just a guy who is one of the ultimate team players, and it's hard not to go higher on a player like that. He's, just a good guy that you want to have on your team, always sticking up for his teammates, always kind of keeping things light. But he's definitely a get down to business kind of guy when it hits the fan. And 2 goals in the last 3 games of the postseason for Paul. You could tell that he just did not want to leave that ice, did not want the season to end as soon as it did. And the last 3 seasons, he has put up his 3 best point totals, and his highest plus minus came this year as well. Just everything across the ice, Paul seems to be doing really well. Second most points in a single season in this past year. Offensively, had one of his best years. Missed a couple games due to injury when I think he was playing his best hockey at the beginning of the season. But overall, you got to go higher on Nick Paul. He has just been such a force, whatever line that Tampa Bay puts him on. And that's the other thing. He wasn't always on that second line. He played a lot on third line. He just went wherever the Lightning needed him to go, usually between line 2 and 3. And I think every team needs a team player as strong as Nick Paul is. And that's where we're going to leave it on tonight's show. Just want to thank all of you for making Locked On Lightning your first listen every day. Now for your second listen, make sure to check out the all-new Locked On NHL Game Night. Every game, every night, until the Stanley Cup champion is crowned. Get local analysis on a national scale. Find NHL Game Night on Locked On NHL or on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And wherever you listen to today's podcast, thanks again for tuning in. Please give us a like, subscribe, a follow, and we'll talk to you guys tomorrow. Thanks again for tuning in to Locked On Lightning, and have a great Tuesday.